Our next part of the programming today is I'm very excited about, as we started the day with Clay talking about the international implications of the space industry and how so much is changing and sort of the globalization of activities, as we heard about lunar activities that are not just NASA but also commercial and international and really in a context of global competition. I think we sort of have designed an entire event hopefully to lead up to this great conversation that we're going to have now. So I will introduce board member and really great supporter of the Future Space Leaders Foundation, Debra Facktor, who will be leading our fireside chat for the next thing. So thank you, Debra.
Okay, we just noticed we have these like old school boxes. We did a student project on take them apart, put them back together, see how many parts are left. It's really a pleasure to be here. Future Space Leaders Foundation is a great organization, as many of you know, and certainly welcoming all of our young professionals and students who are doing their internships in the Washington, D.C. area this year. Congratulations for doing that and getting to spend the afternoon in this beautiful facility here and get kind of the inside scoop on what goes on Capitol Hill. So it's my pleasure today to have a little chat with Air Marshal Paul Godfrey. He goes by Godders, so I just might also call him that. He is a fighter pilot turned space guy. So we're going to ask him a little bit about that. He has been in the U.S. now for, is it almost 2 years?
No, a year now.
A year.
But second time around.
Yes, so we'll talk about that too from his previous time with the F-16, I think it was. He's the Assistant Chief of Space Operations for Future Concepts and Partnerships, a special role that was set up in the United States Space Force by General Saltzman, recognizing the value of working with our friends and allies on important topics for space. So in this role, he is responsible for integrating allies and partners with the Space Force's capability development strategy. He's been in the Royal Air Force since 1991 and a fighter pilot for most of his career. We shared a little bit. He started out flying the Harrier or the AV-8B, which I worked on as a summer intern at McDonnell Aircraft a very long time ago in St. Louis.
It worked really well. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, that was good. And he's had a number of flying experiences in his career until shifting a little bit about 5 years ago, looking at the combination of coalition air and space power and how to bring that together. So really excited to have him here today. So first, I'm going to start our conversation. He does have a little bit of news to share. If any of you saw an announcement yesterday with the rollout of the Space Force's International Space Strategy, which Godders has been in front of. I think this has been your job for the past year. So maybe I'll just start with that. Why is it so important to have our allies and partners working together with the U.S. to collaborate internationally on space?
Hey, well, firstly, thanks for the opportunity. Especially with the accent, I did wonder whether I was going to burst into flames on the week of 4th of July, walking into a... but I think we've forgotten all of that by now. I'm very proud to be living out here. You know what, at the beginning of the International Partner Strategy, it's almost the very first words from CSO, from General Saltzman. He says, space is the ultimate team sport. And I think, clearly you've been talking about commercial space exploration this morning. It is exactly the same when it comes to national security space, military space, whatever you want to call it. And I'd actually written down a quote where further in that intro, he says, space is too complex, too vast, and too risky for any single power to control. It's an interesting place to be because certainly if I give you my experience, so the reason I got into space 5 years ago was I got the opportunity to stand up the United Kingdom Space Command. Now that is only 5 years ago. Now, bear in mind the United States Space Force is only 5 years old, but the US has been doing significant amounts of national security space for a long time. And there have been collaborations as well. The UK was about the third nation, I think. And I'm not here representing the UK, by the way. I'm here representing all of the allies. I am an officer within the United States Space Force, but clearly I will leverage my own experience in the United Kingdom. But the UK was about the third country on Earth to, no, it's about the third. Let's call it the third. to have a dedicated military communications satellite in. Amazingly, most of you probably know this, called Skynet. It did come before the Terminator movies. For those of you who have watched the Terminator.
Involvement.
Yeah. So there has been collaboration in space for the longest time. However, the catalyst for a number of space commands, I don't think anywhere is going to go near a service just yet because of the size of cadres around the world. But was ultimately for the UK was NATO in 2019 declaring space an operational domain. And if I'm honest, that kind of snuck up on people. It was one of these things where Russia had clearly been up to various things in space for a while, but because of sanctions, because of various things, it started drifting off. But then China rapidly accelerated through on this sort of exponential growth of, frankly, dual-use capability. So when you've got a capability, SJ-21, that can dock, rendezvous, grab another satellite, in the particular case they showed in, I think it was 2023, and then drag it a couple of thousand kilometers into a graveyard orbit, fantastic debris cleanup capability. Also, a potentially fantastic counter-satellite capability as well. And I think you're starting to see more and more unclassified conversations about the potential for nuclear weapons in space, additional Chinese capabilities. I'm on a roll here, but so jump in when you need me to stop. But do you guys remember Balloon Gate, when the Chinese balloon was across the continental United States? So we were standing up UK Space Command at the time, and again, this was a focus in the UK. What was interesting to me, at the same time, I said, I'd asked our team in the UK Space Operations Center, can you tell me how many Chinese satellite reconnaissance satellites have overflown us in the last week that this balloon has been flying over the US? And it was in the region of, it was a classified number, in the region between around about 400 satellites. No one was talking about those. Not a single politician, it wasn't in the news, and it's happening minute by minute every day. Yet you get a single balloon that is in the airspace of the United States doing the same kind of job in terms of reconnaissance, and suddenly everyone's talking about it. So space is one of these things that has been in the background. As I say, the threat has snuck up on us. So the catalyst being 2019, NATO declaring space an operational domain, and suddenly there was a domino effect where France stood up their space command, then the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and it continued from there. And the interesting thing now sat in this job is the United States Space Force has been a startup since they formed in 2019. And so it is only now, the commercial strategy last year, international partner strategy this year, that we're now starting to develop the processes to deal with all of these nations that are standing up their own space commands. And it is important that we do work together, because I'll finish the world's longest answer with two things. One, I think there's a deterrent aspect to this. So just take a WGS satellite, with a number of different national badges on the side. If you're China, you're Russia, you're whoever, that changes your decision calculus as to whether you are going to take action against that, because you're not just taking action against a single nation, you are taking action against multiple nations. That's a different risk calculus. The other thing is resilience. So, take any sort of shooting war. Someone goes after one of your ground entry points for SATCOM, it's gone, but if you are part of a resilient, international, allied, and interoperable space network, you just switch. Use someone else's. You don't have to have had your own geography, your own bits of kit. You can start using other people. So I think deterrence and resilience are probably the biggest things.
Do you think it was in the U.S., and certainly the space community, and you pointed out when we were chatting in the back that space tends to be in our own world, our outer space world, and we are super clear and understanding of the capabilities, but to the general public, nobody really knows about space, and we constantly talk about how to promote it. So we look back to 2019 and NATO making this point. Do you think this was a surprise, and that the allies think about space in the same way that the US does? Or has it only been in these past 5 years where we start to think more outwardly? Or is it more public, and before it was just a small group that would work together? Or like, what has changed really in people's thinking?
I think that's the change. It was a small, specialized group that was talking about space internationally previously, primarily on SATCOM. More than anything, GPS is the sort of Space Force gift to the world when it comes to it, but clearly there are other PNT constellations out there. And clearly the US has been leading in Earth observation as well. If you take what the NRO does and national capabilities that provide that sort of exquisite intelligence as well. So I think there is still a lack of understanding at the very senior levels, both in military, both in politicians. In my last job, I'd give a number of talks. I went to, the equivalent of here, went to Parliament, gave a couple of speeches there. And it was always fascinating to me to see the reaction when I would just talk about the potential for the loss of the PNT, position, navigation, and timing signal in a day. There was a UK report called the Blackett Report in 2018. It tried to put a financial figure against it. Then it said £1 billion a day. Now, it's about $2 billion a day now. They'd increased that estimate. But that does not, that doesn't come anywhere close to explaining the social issues involved with traffic lights not working, or nuclear power issues, or safety, or people not being able to steer their boat in the right direction, not being able to drive a car. All of these sorts of things that we got a glimpse of in the pandemic, which was only about not being able to, get your sourdough or your toilet paper or whatever from the local store. So I would tell those sorts of stories and the linkages between the, just life here on Earth, daily life, and suddenly you get a spark of acknowledgement. And then you talk about the military aspects I've already mentioned, from PNT, crucial to what we do in everything. If you take the strikes in Iran the other week, absolutely 100%. The accuracy was down to GPS at the end of the day. They would have known it through intelligence based on NRO, NSA, NGA type capabilities. SATCOM, speaking, authorization halfway around the world when you've got global forces, you cannot do without space. And now there are so many threats to us having that space superiority. People are slowly waking up to it. And here's the difference. So if I take, we did quite well when we stood up our UK Space Command, and people, especially if you're staffers on various appropriations committees or whatever it happens to be around here. But just to give you a scale of the difference, my budget for, I think it was 2023-24, was £100 million. And I walk into the US Space Force and it was a $30 billion budget. And therefore, the difficulty is with an international partner strategy, I sat there as a UK Space Commander thinking, right, with a limited amount of money, how do I add value to the US? And genuinely, that was one of my priorities. How do I add value to the United States? So that it isn't the United States just providing space superiority for everyone. How do we stand up? How do we add value? How do we provide resilience? All of these sorts of things. It isn't just into specific capability or a satellite, or it's thinking of problems in a different way. People who've heard me before are probably bored of me using the same analogy, but having seen Star Wars in 1978, there's a kind of, because the US has got a $30 billion budget, if China's building a Death Star, the US will try and build a bigger Death Star. Mm-hmm. Whereas allies and partners will look for the exhaust port because we know we can't build one. We just don't have the money to build one. So it brings a different level of thinking. It brings a different level of analysis of intelligence. Allies and partners have got geography around the world. Terrestrial geography matters when it comes to access to space, understanding space from space domain awareness. If you're looking at potential electromagnetic warfare, all of these sorts of things make a difference. So there are a number of different ways outside of a huge budget that allies can make a difference, and that's what we're seeing now. The issue is There's so many people knocking at the door who want to get into space because they are now understanding the importance of space.
So with the strategy that came out yesterday, and I encourage everybody to go read it, take a look, what does success look like? So there's always a process to do a big project and collaborate and get a lot of inputs and buy-in and set your vision. So can you share the vision that you'd like to achieve, and how do you know you get success?
Well, so it's an interesting question. One of the things that we did, so normally in a sort of military strategy, you then have an implementation or a plan. In the military, it's always very nice. It's a PowerPoint slide. You've got lines of operation, and you've got a thing that you're trying to achieve, an end state that you're trying to achieve. And you measure success along the way. You know, am I on track to achieve this end state? What is the risk against achieving the end state? Now, we did something different in this one. If you have a look at it, we've got enduring goals rather than an end state. And the reason for that was space is changing so rapidly. If you try and put a sort of stake in the ground and try and achieve it, or a long-term stake in the ground and try and achieve it, then I think we're going to miss. You know, we have to evolve over the years. So it is an iterative, well, when we do the implementation plan, it will be iterative, you know, because I think things will be changing. So what does success look like? Firstly, success looks like getting a strategy published you know, I guess in the DoD, probably. I was, you know, having come from a relatively small Air Force, you know, one of the bigger ones around the world, but nowhere near as big as what we have here in the United States.
How long did it take you to get it coordinated and signed off?
This is exactly it, you know. So we'd essentially finished the writing. Actually, we did it reasonably quickly. We'd essentially finished the writing in around about December, January. And then the rest of the time has essentially been co-award. Now, clearly there was an administration change, you know, and we had to check with the administration and so on. But the bureaucracy there in the DoD is a good one. So, you know, honestly, it would be easy to say that we've achieved success and admire the strategy, but, you know, as Ryan over there will tell you, I'm working the team really hard because what I want to get onto now is the implementation plan, which then gets to the milestones and specific tasks. The other thing, along with those, you know, enduring goals, which were, by the way, I like threes, you know, they kind of roll off the tongue, but secure, communicate, and integrate. You know, secure is about securing our national interests in, through, and space, in, from, and to space, but also empowering allies as combat multipliers. Communication is about information sharing and interoperability. And integrate is about integrating allies at all points across what we call the sort of joint force development continuum, which is force design, force development, and force employment. Force employment years 0 to 3, force development years 2 to 7, force design years 5 to 15. So you can see it's a short and long-term strategy. What we'll do with the implementation plan is run I think 2 or 3 workshops coming up in August. In the strategy itself, there are some what we term specified tasks, which is unusual for a strategy, and we had a long conversation about that. Generally, people don't want to put tasks in a strategy because you have already, that means someone has to deliver something.
Right.
Yeah. So we did that. CSO was happy to sign up to it. So already we've got things to achieve.
Some accountability.
Some accountability. And there were 2 reasons for that. 1, I wanted to get this moving. We wanted to get this moving within the US Space Force. 2, we wanted to demonstrate to allies and partners that we were serious about this. And so they now know on each particular area of force design, force development, force employment, who is responsible for which bit. I want to get further into the detail. I want to get, whether it's annual milestones to achieve, and then again look at risk to achieving those milestones, you know, a simple red, amber, green assessment of whether we're getting there. So firstly, the next success point, having had it published, will be having the governance and that implementation plan, and meanwhile always checking on, are we achieving these milestones and tasks. So yeah, there's a lot to get at, but it's brilliant. I love it because it has enabled us to get to to kind of champion allies across not only the Space Force, but across the DoD, whether it's in SAF-IA, DoD itself, OSD, and then out into the intelligence community as well, because all of the intelligence community have international engagement plans. Some, if you look at NGA, NRO, NSA, you know, there's a lot that is related to space. And one of the biggest issues I saw as a foreign space commander was there's about 70 different organizations that you could have a conversation about space with. So we're just trying to pull that together, not to align everyone or just make sure that everyone is talking off the same sheet of music, but realistically to ensure that we're not telling overseas allied partners different stories across the board. So again, this is a long-term thing that we're just trying to embed in the fabric of what we do day to day in the Space Force.
Very good. It sounds like that also is how you can get, you mentioned the enduring goals, but a sustainable strategy, that it's not just for one problem. It is a way of working and collaboration going forward. So what about the role of industry? And when I joined Airbus US 5.5 years ago, we have Airbus UK, and I know you've worked with a lot of my colleagues there, and France and Germany, and there's many companies in here who also have an international presence. We have global supply chains that we work with. How do you see industry playing a role? Because we have our own ways of collaborating internationally and with certain constraints. We have export controls, we have tariffs, or maybe not tariffs. We have different national security requirements or clearances. How do you see industry playing a role in this strategy and supporting you?
Yeah, I think industry got a huge role, and you know, I think it's July 29th. I'm talking to some, through an industry body, ultimately to get feedback and have a conversation with industry. Because if I'll tell you a quick story. I promise it'll be quick. 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago in the summer, that I came across UK Space Commander, as I mentioned, and I went and visited all the major US primes over in LA. Every single time I wanted a conversation about potential classified capabilities that maybe we could buy, maybe we could collaborate on, maybe we could work with, build in the UK, all of these sorts of different things. I was unable to have that conversation with most, if not all of those primes.
I know this problem.
Exactly. So the issue being, it's fine, right? Everyone's got secrets. Yeah. But the issue in this particular case is, I mentioned budgets. The UK's got a larger budget than many of the other new space commanders that are standing up. Is that if I can't collaborate in some of the more classified areas, then I'm going to have to go and invent it and spend that money and try and do these things that the US might have been doing for 10, 15 years. That's where I think we need to work with industry, because as you know, generally there's some sort of wall in the middle of the ocean where you guys in the US have got clearances, but that doesn't translate to people in Europe.
Right. And ultimately, there's a lot we can do together, the investment in technologies, and I mentioned the supply chain side as well, that you can leverage in any country. And when industry puts their own dollars in, you want to see it in as many global applications as possible. But we also need the insight into what the government is thinking. So you can have supply and demand. So government says, I want this, will you go build it? Or we say, we've built it, do you want it? But it's really more than that to align on what are the capabilities that we have, what are the facilities, what are the skill sets, and if government doesn't talk to industry, you may assume something that we have that we don't have anymore, or you assume we don't have it and we already do, and it's duplicated. So I'm really glad you're going to keep up the dialogue.
Yeah, and I've had conversations over the last couple of days actually about understanding the space industrial bases in overseas nations. I mentioned, how can someone add value to the US? There might be something, a critical mineral. There might be, something that is more easily available with an overseas partner than it is in the US. There's a collaboration right there, and supply chains, those sorts of things, the things that get disrupted if there is conflict. You know, back to the resilience point, and especially, we say the word industry, but given that commercial space is probably the sort of 60, 70, 80% solution for a lot of the militaries out there, just take SATCOM, just buy SATCOM bandwidth off of someone, then we need to understand all of this. Coming back to implementing the strategy, though, if you try and do everything everywhere all at once, becomes almost an impossible nut to crack. So that's why I want to get to these workshops, just start chipping away a little bit at a time and see where we go with this.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a little personal question, and then we might have time for one or two from the audience. So why were you the right guy for this job? Like, how did you get the job? You mentioned your second time back in the U.S., you were a fighter pilot, then space. Like, what was the special sauce that you had that...
Honestly, right place, right time.
Yeah.
So don't, especially for you guys just starting out, don't try and build your career on luck. There's a great, the golfer Gary Player had a great phrase. Long story, I'll cut it short. 1978, I think it was the Open Championship in the UK, and he was about to win the championship, but put his ball right by the clubhouse on the final, on the 18th. And he ended up using the back of the club, got it 2 inches, the hole chipped in, won. And in the press conference, someone said, Gary, were you lucky? Did you think you were lucky on that? He said, yeah, I did think I was lucky. But you know what I found? The more I practice, the luckier I get. Mm-hmm. And, so if I just take you back to a decision I made, once I'd finished base command. I was the commander of a fighter base up in Scotland. And it had been a while since I had done command and control, so I volunteered to go to Al Udeid and be part of the Combined Air and Space Operations Center. I was there for 6 months. It was during COVID. There was an awful lot going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. Fascinating. That decision got me in the right place to compete for UK Space Command. I was number 2 for that job, but the guy in front of me on the board got promoted, so they pulled me for that job, which got me into the UK Space Command job. Did all right in that, ended up meeting General Saltzman, came to the end of my time at a point that he was ready to bring in an international officer. And so, I've joke about the fact that my memoir, because I was lucky I flew World War II aircraft as well as part of one of my jobs, that my memoir will be From Spitfires to Space, the Accidental 3-Star.
Oh, I love that. I love that. We will buy it.
I've copyrighted that in case anyone's going to use it.
Would anybody like to ask a question? Oh, there's so many. I'm going to go with the first hand back there. Really project.
Yeah, it's a great question. What's interesting is, in all other domains, you do have international rules, norms, and procedures. And people talk about the space being the Wild West. I don't think it is. Most people stick to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which is clearly a while ago. It probably needs updating, but that's where the United Nations plays an enormous role in looking at what are those rules, norms, and behaviors. But I think the conversation is now changing, where certainly when I started in UK Space Command, if I talked about space being an operational domain, I could see a twitch in some of my commercial or civil space colleagues. That's normalized now. Now the conversation is about a warfighting domain. It is the whole it is already weaponized, right? That's done. So it's exactly the point you make now about maintaining the advantage. So I think we're past those conversations, and you'll have noted General Whiting at the National Space Symposium, CSO at the National Space Symposium, if you talk about Golden Dome and space-based interceptors. These are the things that we need to be talking about. So, of course, just like in the maritime domain or the air domain, there are international rules, norms, and behaviors. But I also think now, and it is a jump for a lot of nations out there, we need to be considering what are the laws of armed conflict in space. And when you get into law of armed conflict, I talked about my time out in the Middle East, when you are looking at a target, there's all sorts of things that you look at in a targeting cycle, not least proportionality and collateral damage and so on. The thing with space is this collateral damage, where that is different to the other domains. That debris is not falling down to Earth if there is some sort of come together in space. And I think that is the area that we need to concentrate on to understand how we project space superiority. And if you get a chance, have a read, Google it, of General Saltzman's The Theory of Competitive Endurance, where you're talking about avoiding operational surprise, denying first mover advantage, and then responsible counter space campaigning. And the responsible side is really important. Otherwise, none of us have got access to space. And it's lost to all of us. But it's a fascinating question, and one that is being talked about everywhere in policy areas around the world.
Very good. You had a question?
Hey.
My name is Liz. I'm a JD. We have a university, program. I have a question regarding commercial space defense is working on now. And I'm just wondering, based off of your experience, what lessons can you list commercial space sector learn from the way that defense agencies and your space force create international partnerships?
It's an interesting one. I'd hesitate to get involved in commercial space purely because they seem to be doing pretty well on their own. I think it's learning from both. I mentioned in terms of researching and then pulling together the international partner strategy. I did speak to a number of different agencies as to how they do international partnerships. I didn't necessarily go to commercial, but I did look and see how it works. As an example, I spoke to, it's not commercial space, it's Space Development Agency, Derek Tournier. And that was very much driven purely by need. Not necessarily an existing relationship. Actually, we need a ground entry point over here. Who are the best people in this part of the world? These people, right, we'll go and have a discussion with those people. And I think it's economics driving the commercial space industry for exactly the same thing. We were talking about OneWeb, Eutelsat, and I work closely with OneWeb in my old job, and just the ground network, ground entry point network that they had to have for the OneWeb constellation to work, that drove exactly who they were going to speak to and who they wanted to work with. And I think what you'll see now, we're calling it hybrid space architectures. So yes, sovereign, go to a company like Airbus, build and fly and operate what you need, but then you're also going to have commercial space out there that you're going to use and have contracts with. And so I think this is going to evolve as we move forward. And as I mentioned, that sort of 80% solution, I think you'll see an awful lot of foreign space commands, overseas allies and partners, utilizing an awful lot of commercial space as there are more and more applications from space domain awareness, on-orbit space domain awareness, as an example. There's a number of companies doing that sort of stuff. I know one of the guys from Astroscale in the audience as well, some great capabilities in what they do. The hardest thing is always finding those companies with a potential silver bullet that will save you potentially millions or billions in your own defense budgets, so that you can work with them. So it's complex, but I think this is evolving all the time. But I think it's a really good question.
Yasmin, how are we doing on time? Do I have time for one more question, or we need to wrap it up? We're over.
4 minutes. We blew it.
Okay, so we'll pause the questions there. So just a final get off the stage, like your final Jeopardy answer. What's the best advice you've had from a mentor that you would like to pass on?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think, given my age and 34 years in the military now, I've ended up probably distilling it into 3 of my own when I mentor people. First one is always be yourself. Sounds obvious, but you see an awful lot of people, coming up to promotions or trying to get ahead or whatever, just changing slightly, behaving differently. Mm-hmm. You see it with kids, people at university, changing to try and fit into a group. My advice is be you. That's what you're going to be. You've already, everyone in this room you've got an anchor point. That's going to be you for the rest of your life, so use it. That's why you're in these positions that you're in now. Second one is don't plan too far ahead. Sounds a bit ridiculous, but have hopes and dreams, know where you want to go. But just now, I mentioned my story just in the last 5 years. It might not be a linear path to where you want to get to. That path is going to meander, and if a door shuts in front of you, I guarantee another door is going to open. Just throw yourself through it. Don't worry about it. The other part of that as well is people tend to think about the next thing. I had a couple of knockbacks in the sort of middle of my career, and actually that made me sit there and enjoy the moment. And I was so much better for enjoying the moment, living in the now, because I concentrated on the task at hand. I didn't worry about what was next. And the final thing, which is purely lifted, if you ever get a chance, Google it or listen to it on Spotify, Wear Sunscreen by Baz Luhrmann. There's a line in there that says, do one thing every day that scares you. Mm-hmm. And that is about personal growth. Scare defines scare, makes you uncomfortable. I joke about turning the shower cold for 30 seconds at the end of it. That it's just something that gets you out of the normal daily routine, gets you on stage, talking to Debra in front of a group of people I've never met before.
Well, hopefully that wasn't too scary.
All of these sorts of things. But those are probably, and we're now 6 minutes over, but
Love
those
it.
are probably the 3 that I'd give you.
Thank you, Godders. I really appreciate your joining us today. Good luck with the strategy. We're here to support you and look forward to further collaboration.
Great, thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity.